Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. Another edition of Mom at Home. Today, we have not one, not two, not three. How many guests do we? I stopped counting after two. I'm a drummer. That's what we do. I don't count anything after two. Technically, I'm supposed to be able to count to four, but I just repeat two twice, and we're good to go. All right, we have Mr. Bill back from his vacation. He has brought along some wonderful, top-notch musicians, and today we're going to be talking about brass instruments and explore how they contribute to that big old, beautiful, brassy, bold quintet sound. Welcome, Bill. Let me see where you are now. I've lost you. There you are. I found you again,
sir.
Bill. All right.
All right.
Take it away.
Middle of the screen. Thanks, BJ. It's great to be back. And it's so great to see all these great friends on the screen. We are welcoming back Ryan Kelly. You may remember Ryan from our Behind the Baton podcast about, 4 weeks ago now?
That was right.
The first week we were doing this. And Ryan has brought in a couple of members of his Make Believe Brass. So I want to thank you all for being here and taking your time to be with us. Let's, before we get into talking about the brass instruments, the ones you represent, and others that we may not be seeing here live today, I'd like to introduce our guests. We are joined by June Satin, trombonist. June, welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for asking me.
Oh, absolutely. June's an educator. She's a music contractor. And if you don't know what that means, it means if somebody says, I need 100 players for a concert tomorrow night, she gets on the phone or the email or the text or however we do it these days and gets the musicians in place. She's also a tremendous player of the trombone. And she's played in a diverse range of ensembles. She gave me quite a list here. I had to narrow down a bit, but some great names. The Shreveport Symphony, Ringling Brothers Circus, Opera a la carte, Bel Air Brass, the Hour of Power Orchestra, and the Saratoga Symphony. So June, again, welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely great to have you here. And our conductor, educator, and performer friend Ryan Kelly actually spearheaded the idea for today's presentation, which is going to conclude, by the way, with a brass ensemble video that Ryan put together. And he'll talk a little bit more about that when we get to that point. Ryan's, of course, going to be addressing the trumpet today, which is his main instrument. And then rounding out our trio of brass players today is trumpeter Kurt Curtis. Thank you, Kurt, for being here.
Thanks,
Kurt. Oh, man, pleasure. It's so great to see you. It's been a few years. Kurt has the distinction of being the conductor of the Disneyland Band, which, of course, is a staple of the Disneyland experience since the park's opening 65 years ago. Not only that, but Kurt's father, Larry Curtis, was an instructor at Cal State Long Beach, where we all met, and also conducts the Long Beach Municipal Band. So give yourselves all a hand. Thank you all for being here. Appreciate that. So let's start. I thought we'd start with the trumpet. And Ryan and Kurt, I'm going to throw it out to you. What I'm thinking here is maybe sort of a layman's intro as to how the trumpet works. We've all seen it. We've all heard it. But for the most part, maybe we're not quite sure how it works. What are you doing when you're doing what you do with the trumpet? So go into the valves, the tubing, the range of the instrument. Does it transpose? The dynamic range, how loud, soft, all those good things. I'm going to throw it to you guys and let you talk about it.
All right. Well, I'll throw a couple of things out, and Kurt's a content expert, so I'm going to get out of the way pretty quick. The trumpet is a keyed bugle. It started off with no valves or anything like that, and so they added those things to be able to expand the range and the ability of the number of notes that the instrument could play. But it's sort of the top of the brass pyramid, and for me, it was just one of those things where I heard it, and once it caught my ear, I went, I want to play that instrument. It just really, it pulled me in. So that's sort of my personal connection to it. But Kurt can talk to you a lot about things about, the technical aspects of the instrument itself. But that's what it is. It's a keyed bugle.
Okay, so by keyed, you're talking about the valves that you're pushing down while you play.
Let me jump in here real quick because I just happen to have a keyed old cornet from the 1860s right here. So you'll notice like a normal B-flat trumpet has valves, right? So you can see the valves there. You see that up and on, there you go. You need to look up there. Back in the Civil War era, when the brass makers from Europe came over and started making instruments in our country, they were using the technology that was popular in Europe at the time, which was keys. So you can see now, I don't know if you can see that one. This is a real rare horn because it's a top action rotary valve, E-flat cornet, built in 1861. So it wasn't until, so Ryan is exactly right. It started off as basically a key bugle. And then as technology kind of went on, we started getting more interested and intrigued by the idea of using piston valves. And so they started making cornets, which I have one of these as well. Here, I'm just pulling out of my bag here. This would be a B-flat cornet built in 1895. Now you notice we've gone to piston valves. So that's kind of the early history of the cornet, which developed into the trumpet at the early 1900s.
Okay, so you showed us the valves on the earlier one from the 1800s, but essentially those and the valves in a trumpet today are doing the same, serving the same function?
Yeah, absolutely. Every time you push a valve down, you're opening up a chamber. So if I push this first valve down, it opens the chamber right there, which gives me an option there. The rest, a lot of it has to do with your lips and your airstream in terms of range, how we get around the horn. But you obviously have to have the right valve combinations to get the right note. And then the rest, of course, really has to do with your embouchure. But the valves open up those chambers, and that's what gives us our different combinations, which gives us, you know, the whole range and the chromatic scale from low F sharp all the way up to as high as you can play.
Okay, and I've heard some trumpet players go pretty darn high, kind of a very high hurtful range. Now you use the term embouchure, Kurt, and I'm going to throw this out to all three of you. Can you give us an explanation of what that is for people that don't know?
Ryan, why don't you jump in?
Sure. Yeah. So your embouchure is actually all the muscles around in this region of your face. It's a French word, but yeah. And so what you're doing is, in order to create a vibrating column of air, you're going to buzz your lips. Now, in June's case, because she plays a low brass instrument, that's going to be a little lower buzz, and she can demonstrate that. But for those of us like Kurt and I that play the upper brass instruments, it's going to sound a little bit more like a mosquito. So as I'm teaching beginners, you know, I'll say, hey, you know, to really annoy your parents and to make the right sound on a trumpet, walk around the house doing this. And you just want to kind of get that going, because like in a reed instrument, the reed is vibrating, and that's what sets that column of air into motion. But in our case, we've got to do that with our embouchure or our lips.
Okay, so you're making that buzzing sound, and now you mentioned reed. That would apply, of course, to a woodwind instrument. So are they also buzzing the reed on a woodwind? No, so the brass are buzzing.
Yeah, I just happen to have a woodwind instrument here too. I'll grab the soprano saxophone, and if I pull off the mouthpiece, you can see the reed and how it sits there, and there's a little gap. And when you wet that and you put it in your mouth, you're just making a space for it here and setting your teeth on top here. And then as you just blow air, not vibrate the air or not buzz, but just blow, you get that really pleasant sound. And then if you attach it to the instrument, you set that air column into motion, and you should get a note. So that's the reed. And then, you know, Kurt's got a mouthpiece free where he could show you just what that buzzing sounds like on just the mouthpiece.
Okay.
I actually warm up every morning. The first thing I do, just mouthpiece, because if you get a clean buzz on your mouthpiece, that's just going to be projected right through the instrument. So there really is, that's kind of the fundamental basic right now, you know. You're kind of buzzing around the mouthpiece. I have a set routine that I do. And again, if I can get that nice and clean, get my airstream just relaxed and blowing nice and evenly, that'll all translate. And then the trumpet really is just a megaphone at that point. Or in June's case, then the trombone is a megaphone. But it really starts right here.
Right. I noticed when you were playing through just the mouthpiece, it sounded very trumpet-like. So the trumpet itself is just projecting that for you.
Exactly.
June, could you give us a little demonstration of your mouthpiece, and then maybe a little bit of how the trombone sounds?
Yeah, it's really great to talk about the mouthpiece, because that's one of the hardest things, I think, for young students to understand. And when I do a lot of children's concerts, I try to get them to understand that that the brass family is called the brass family because of how we buzz this. Because as Ryan showed, you know, the saxophones can be made out of brass, but that's why we're called this family. And we all hold up our mouthpieces because my mouthpiece is a little bit bigger. And because of different trombones that I have, my mouthpieces can get really, really big. But this is where it counts. And this is where you make the sound. And if I can get them into the fact of just doing what I call a siren, I just tell them it's like you yawn, oh, you know, and you just get that feeling and you tighten and loosen these corners, but you got to get this first. And that's sometimes the hardest thing for someone who wants to pick up a brass instrument. A lot of them all want to play the trumpet, but I tell them, don't worry about it. The trombone is a fun instrument. Don't worry that you don't have any of these buttons, and I'm going to show you in a minute here. The slide is so much fun to use. I tell them, first of all, that I started out when I was probably about 7 years old. And the reason I play trombone is because I just went, oh, wow, I got to play that instrument. Everything my brother did, I did. He played piano, I played piano. He was a year older. He brought this thing home, and I said, don't tell me to wait till next year. You know, if I could do that, I can do this. So I tell them, look, if this sounds like I'm having fun up here, showing you guys this instrument, then go for it. Because if you can make this, your arms will grow. We have, and I tell them, if you pick up the trombone, you're going to be very special because you don't have any valves. You're the only brass instrument that does not. We have what we call 7 positions. And then they say, well, how can I make all those other notes? Well, you come right back up here and you either tighten or loosen that embouchure and you get the other notes higher or lower. And you can go all the way down those positions. And they say, well, how do I know what the positions are? Well, real briefly, all the way in is first. Put my fingers out to the bell, that's third. And then I say, we're going to have math class, what comes between 1 and 3, 2. They all start getting it. And then fingers behind the bell is 4. Then I tell them, look at my slide and see that little line out there. And I show them all that. And I say, if you go out just before that, if you see it, you're too far, that's 6. And then I say, what comes between 4 and 6? 5. So they've had math class at the same time. And then I do something like this. Then they go, oh, wow, that's fun. So I just really try to tell them that they don't all have to start like on a bugle or on a trumpet, even if their arms aren't long enough. If this looks like fun, this is another instrument in the brass family, and we all make the sound the same way. So it's a little bit about how to get started on the trombone. And I have a lot of different size trombones. You were talking about where the trumpet came from, but the trombone started out as a sackbut, which I also play. It's a French word to push-pull, and it's got a smaller cut-down bell size, and it just sounds real light and airy, but I've played in sackbut groups, and they're fun too. So it's a real fun instrument to really delve into.
Wow, June, you've just opened up a whole Pandora's box of questions on my end. I mean, the saxbut, it goes all the way back to, what, the Renaissance time?
Renaissance, yeah. I've played in Renaissance groups and done some sackbut recording, and I've got all my costumes and played the...
I have to ask, is this a sackbut from that era, or do they still make that instrument?
Well, in this first sackbut group that I was in Shreveport, we had Finkas, which were original sackbuts that were they actually sound really light and airy, and it's really hard to focus the sound because they are from that genre. And you can get better ones. A lot of times when I came out here, what the guys were doing is cutting down old trombones to the speculations. And when you play outside, like I played out at the Ren Fair for years, and when you play outside, that sound will carry better instead of feeling airier. And I have a cut down one, and then I have had access to use the Finka, the Giardinelli, all of those that I've used in recording and in real sackbut ensembles. Like if you're going to be in a studio recording and you really want that authentic sound.
So what you've said just there in that last couple of sentences, I think all of the players here and anybody watching would agree. If you really want to sort of be able to say yes to any gig, you've got to have the arsenal, right? You've got to have all the
Gotta have
correct
it all.
tools. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
you gotta have
Ryan, Kurt, let me bounce back to you. June showed us how, with the different positions and controlling your embouchure in a different way, you create all these different pitches. I'm going to assume it's the same with the trumpet. Is that correct?
It is in the same way that I was really glad June brought this up because as Kurt pointed out too, the trombone has 7 slide positions and the trumpet has 7 valve combinations. So you can start off with open, like June's first position. Let me turn the other way. So in the same way, but and in the same way she can get different notes, so can we. You know, you can do all that with these instruments because all those notes are in there, but it's all controlled by the embouchure. Coming back to that, the other thing that I thought might be interesting too, Bill, because Kurt had referenced the cornet, and I know Kurt's got a cornet. He and I both have trumpets. He probably has a flugelhorn at his fingertips too, like I do. But and June can embrace this too. The brass instruments are made up of different kinds of tubing. So the trumpet you can hear has a very bright sound to it. That same note on the flugelhorn sounds like this. Because this instrument has more of the larger type of tubing or conical tubing, like a low brass instrument would. This instrument, the flugelhorn, is technically, and Kurt, correct me if I'm wrong, technically part of the tuba family.
It is.
Yeah, always played by trumpet players, and but part of the tuba family. But what lies in between these two is the cornet. So what might be kind of interesting is if I play a note, then Kurt plays a note, then I play a note. Listen to this.
Hold up.
Stand by.
I'm not sure if I get a cornet mouthpiece in here.
Oh, all right.
I probably do. So keep going. You go.
Okay. So yeah, but you can see, these are beautiful instruments. I think everybody in the session today has an arsenal of professionally made instruments. Some that we've had, a short time. Some of these instruments have been with us 30, 40 years.
All right, we're good.
I've got a trumpet, one of my Bach Stradivarius trumpets, not this one, that's been with me since 1976. I got it used for $300, and we've been all over the world. Where I've had it longer than all of my kids and my wife and my dog. Here's a trumpet sound. Here's the cornet, and here's the flugel. Pretty subtle in terms of tone difference, but when you get going on the instrument, I think you could tell pretty quickly. Chuck Mangione in the 70s really brought the flugelhorn, I would say, into the fore and into popularity. Wouldn't you agree, June?
Yeah, absolutely. And trombones, I have 2 of them right here with me. I was going to bring my sack butt out, but I didn't have enough hands. But here's the trombone that I was playing on. That's what most students will start on. It's a little bit bigger than what they would start out on. That's my 3B. They might start out on something we call a 2B, which is smaller than that. And then here's what I call my orchestra horn, which has a valve. And they always ask me, like, how come you've got one button, one valve? And it just because that makes me go lower and richer in sound depending on what I'm playing. And I can do that. And you were talking about tubing. Usually when we do demonstrations, the trumpets always go first, which is really cool. And you guys talk about opening the passageway with the different valves. And then I'll get up and I'll let them know. I'll say, look, if you go under your sink and you see all that piping under there, that's what this is kind of. There's no buttons or anything. It's just that piping, I said, and it does come off. But the length changes. And then we have a physics class with them. And I say, okay, tell me if the sound goes up or down, depending on if it's shorter or if I lengthen it. And they get the idea of the tubing and the positions, and then they get the idea of the valve and closing corridors and making certain combinations with shorter piping. So that kind of helps them to understand that tubing.
Right. And June, that's great. You're touching on some of the subjects we address with our school kids at the museum. And that, of course, is the STEAM standards, where we're talking about science, technology, engineering, arts, and math. And you've addressed that just beautifully. So whenever you're ready to come be a volunteer tour guide for me, I'd love to have you. I'm going to be that guy also, June, because you started out with your trombone by saying, unlike the rest of the brass instruments, we don't have any valves. So let me ask you about the valve trombone. What can you tell me about that fun little guy?
Well, I don't have a valve trombone. That's one instrument I don't have in my arsenal. I've played next to people that are valve trombone players, and they do it because, for one, they've always wanted to play on a valve trombone, and it just instead of using a slide. It's an instrument that I've just never had, and I think that they start out as trombone players, a lot of them, and then they just got interested in the valve trombone. I play euphonium also, so it's not that hard to learn the valve combinations, and it's just that you're playing it on an instrument that looks like a trombone, but the slide is, you're not using the slide.
Does the valve configuration on a valve trombone make any difference in terms of the range or the way in which you play it?
No, I think you still play it the exact same way. Because, like I say, I've sat in groups where somebody next to me was playing a valve trombone, and they're playing the same notes, same pieces that I'm playing. Usually, like it's been like sometimes we're playing Sousa marches, and they're playing the valve, and I'm playing just my trombone. So it's basically the same. They're on a valve instrument.
Uh, Fantastic. And Kurt, let me bounce it back to you here. We've been talking about different types of trumpets. Ryan, you mentioned the Bugle horn, you mentioned the cornet. I've seen some other interesting trumpet iterations in my time, one of which is called a pocket trumpet, which seems to be about this big. And then, of course, the piccolo trumpet, which we'll be hearing later on in the video that you're presenting to us, Ryan. Kurt, have you played those, the pocket trumpet, the piccolo trumpet, and if so?
You won't see the pocket trumpet used much in a professional setting. And the guys that have them, the guys and gals that play pocket, a lot of times they use it as a practice horn if they're traveling and it's just easier. There's not a big call for it, just because you'll find that the sound and the way they're built, just better quality, better pitch, consistency across a horn on a real trumpet or a real cornet. But piccolo is certainly used. I have one here, and actually have one right here in my hand too. This is really, we use it more in classical nature. It's Baroque music. You definitely hear a lot of piccolo trumpet on. Bach used it quite a bit throughout some of his major works. So more on the classical side. I know what you may hear later. I don't want to give that away, but occasionally you hear it in some pop music. I'll play a couple notes if you want to hear a little bit of it. That's a little piccolo.
Made me want to stand right on up there, Kurt. Now I notice the piccolo trumpet seems to have 4 valves versus 3 that I see on a standard trumpet. Why the extra valve?
Only because it's an octave higher than a regular trumpet. For us to get down to some of the lower notes, they add a 4th valve, which opens that more tubing. So it's just so we can get down to some of those notes that we occasionally need. Normally the piccolo is written in the upper register, so we don't use a 4th valve very often. The other reason that it's helpful is that we sometimes need to use what we call false fingerings, which gives us some pitch options that may be better. Sometimes the normal fingering we would use might be a little bit out of tune. Depends on from the horn to horn, and it depends on what note you might be even playing in the chord. You might decide to do an alternate fingering that'll lock that note in a little bit more in tune. So it's nice to have that option.
And these are decisions that you sort of make on the fly, right? As you're sight reading a piece of music, you just know instinctively to use a false fingering or to use the 4th valve or whatever the case may be.
I would say sometimes if you know it's a common note that's almost always out of tune, like sometimes I occasionally use for high A, that would be 1 and 2 for trumpet players. Sometimes a 3rd valve is a better combination. It just all depends on where it is. But I'll also say a lot of those things I find out in rehearsal. We'll run it once and I go, okay, that didn't work. I'm going to try this next time. This next time we go through that, I'm going to try this combination and see if I can't lock that in a little bit better. So I think a lot of that really does have to do with rehearsal. That's what's so great about rehearsal. That's where we kind of hone things in and dial things in, so it just sounds that much better.
right on. And June, you mentioned that you play euphonium, which is, if I'm correct, a member of the tuba subset of the brass family. Am I correct?
Yes.
So we have tuba, we have euphonium, we have baritone, and we also have sousaphone. Are there, and then the helicon before the sousaphone. Are there any other members of that low brass family that I'm forgetting?
I think you've covered them all. And
No, there is one that was real popular back in the 1800s, and that was the tenor horn.
oh,
So it would have been in the same register pretty much as a tenor trombone, but it was valves, and it kind of bridged the gap between baritone, euphonium, and alto horn, which would have been more in the pitch register of a French horn.
right. That's right. I forgot about that one. And just like when you were talking about the fourth valve on the piccolo trumpet there, my euphonium has 4 valves also. And there are some with 3, and then there's baritones with 3. So I have that 4th valve option. But it also, that 4th valve for me on my euphonium allows me to take it into the lower register and get closer to the tuba range, which would be like having a bass trombone. So I can go either way on my euphonium.
Got it. Thank you, June. Let me jump in. We have a regular viewer, Brian B., and he's always got these great questions. He's got one for anybody in the group. What is a Baroque trumpet, and how does it differ from a trumpet?
I think Kurt would be great for that.
Well, we'll see. The piccolo is covering the Baroque trumpet parts, but boy, the original trumpets really they were like just a bugle, really. They had nodes, they had holes in it you covered your fingers with. And that's why the piccolo trumpet really was only good, or the Baroque trumpet was only good in a couple keys, because it had to do with, Ryan, maybe you can show them that open notes, C, G, C, E, G, just an open arpeggio. That's all they could really play. When they got the upper register, some of those notes come closer together and they can cover a few more things. But basically, they look like kind of long open bugles, and they had just certain things that they could cover up with their fingers that would give them some options. But they were kind of out of tune and stuffy and not great until the piccolo trumpet came along and was able to cover that same kind of register, but a lot more efficiently.
Okay, so that's a great explanation of the difference between the two. And it sounds, Kurt, as though what you were saying is there's actually holes in the Baroque trumpet that you're stopping with your fingers, kind of like a recorder then, in that sense?
That's my understanding. Gosh, it was years and years ago. I think Ryan and I both studied with one of the same teachers that had one. I'm talking about Joan LaRue. As I recall, Ryan, correct me if I'm wrong, that they had some node holes.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Yeah, that's what I remember about it being sort of ornate. It was wrapped, but yeah, you would just, as Kurt said, you have these holes, these nodes. But as I recall, a really difficult instrument to play well, like lots of hours.
That's
There's
wonderful.
There's also the cornetto, which uses the trumpet mouthpiece and sounds like a trumpet. That's what we used at the Renaissance and outside. And it's the long black, looks like a licorice stick and has all the holes going down. Not a lot of holes, but more holes. And sometimes they use that. That's an old material.
So cornetto, does that relate to a cornet in any way, or it's just a different name that sounds similar?
I've been told that that's how the trumpets used to start, and then Baroque trumpet, and then it went from there.
Okay. Let's see don't know what that was. So we've talked about ranges, and my understanding of the trumpet is it is what's called a transposing instrument, whereas June, the trombone is not a transposing instrument, right? Could we maybe address that real quickly for people so that they understand the difference between you playing a transposing instrument and you playing a non-transposing instrument?
My fundamental is a B flat, which is kind of funny because even though they'll say play concert C, my fundamental is a B flat, but I play the pitch that I see on the page. Trombone players can play treble clef, we can play bass clef, but we will read exactly what's on there. If I play a B flat and I say to a trumpet player, play a B flat, it won't be the same note. You know, if I tell them you're going to start on a C and we're going to sound the same, that when I start to demonstrate that to like students, or we demonstrate that like in a children's concert, we're trying to let them know that the fundamental of that instrument doesn't necessarily sound the same, so that they don't get confused. And when you're looking at the music, we look at it and we read exactly what's there. And I've had to address trumpet players, and I know Ryan and Kurt can talk about trumpet players, but I've had to coach trumpet players, and I've had to tell them, hey, wait a minute, let me transpose that in my mind before I play that. So we play a step away from that, a whole step, and then I have to describe what a whole step is to that. So we get into a little bit of the theory of the half step, the whole step, and why the instruments are that far apart.
Got it. Okay. Before we go on, let's all make sure our cell phones are off, ringers are off. We're still getting some kind of ping or feedback of some sort. So just double check those, make sure everything's turned off. So your instrument, June, when you pick up a sheet of music and you start playing the trombone part, if I were sitting at a piano playing the bass clef, same notes, they would come out the same, correct?
Not exactly the same. Yeah.
Okay. Whereas Kurt, Ryan, what would happen in your case?
So our sound's a whole step down. So if we have a written C, for instance, it's going to sound B flat. That's on a B flat trumpet. On a C trumpet, which is a little different configuration, you'll notice that if maybe I can get them both in camera here to show you. The C trumpet is the one that's closer to the camera, and you can see it almost looks like the bell is longer, but in reality, the lead pipe and all of the tubing is shorter than the B flat trumpet. So if I play that open sound on the B flat horn, that's our C, but it sounds B flat. If I play that same note here, again, no vowels, you can hear it's a whole step different.
So what is I mean, you have a C trumpet. I know of the C melody saxophone. What's the reasoning for the instruments being transposing?
Well, I'm going to let Kurt tackle that one because he's more of an academic than I can probably explain it better. Just in terms of application, before he does that, is the B flat horn is used in commercial work. It's used in session work. It's the more popular of the two. But just in terms of tone quality, you can hear a difference. Even if I play that same note here. This instrument, the C trumpet, is played a lot in orchestras for a variety of reasons, and maybe Kurt can whack away at that in a moment. But it definitely has a different quality to it, and it's used for, it's a smaller horn, and they get progressively smaller. There's a D, E flat combination trumpet that's smaller than this again. There's an F trumpet, and I believe a G trumpet. So you have all these sort of alliterations and various sizes of these instruments. And some of it is just for the literature, and yeah, really, that's a lot of what it's for.
Got it. Okay, so as a guitar player, for instance, if I can make comparison, I'll have a 6-string guitar. I might have a tenor guitar, which is a 4-string guitar. If I want the higher pitch instrument, I might go to a mandolin or ukulele. I know there's a real rough comparison, but Kurt, I didn't mean to cut you off. My apologies. One more question though from Brian B, and then Kurt, let me have you jump back in. So June, this looks like it's for you. On the trombone, what is that pillbox thing at the top of the instrument? I've been wondering that myself. What is that?
Pillbox thing? Oh, you're talking about on this. On this one, this is a counterweight. This is a weight, a balance on the trombone. That's what they're talking about. This.
I'm guessing that's what he's asking about.
Hey, June, could I have you move a little bit closer to the computer for us? We're starting to lose your mic a little bit. Just get on up there close and personal. No, it's all good. All right.
Any better now?
A little bit better.
Is
Yeah.
that better?
There you go. Thanks, June.
Is that better?
Oh no, I broke her. There it is.
Yeah.
So the counterweight helps when you're holding the instrument up. Is that the function of that? Okay. All right. Very good. And
Bill, let me just add one thing. The trombones do have some smaller ones that are alto trombones pitched in E flat and F, and just like Ryan was saying, the literature will call for something like that. It's not a lot of literature, but there is a lot of alto trombone stuff, and trombone players read. We don't necessarily transpose. We read clefs. Like trumpet players will be able to just look at something and put it in C or put it in D, or they're taught to do that. We're taught to move the C. It's called movable C, and we're taught to go into tenor clef or alto clef. And sometimes when it gets really high, we have to pick up a smaller horn. I do not have an alto, but I have a very small, old small trombone that I use for a lot of the alto register stuff that I've had to do. So,
But there really is a whole lot to this game. You've got to have the arsenal of instruments. You've got to be able to move those clefs around on the paper while you're reading. My hat's off to you, literally. That last question, by the way, I apologize. That was from one of our wonderful volunteers, Joe Rogers. And it looks like Joe has another question here for Ryan or Kurt. Does a true bugle have any valves?
No, true bugle is it's keyless, has no valves. Yeah, and you just it's done. And again, it's the same as if you pick up this beast and say, all right, and this is how we start school every year at my house, is with this. Etc. Right? So that's reveille, and yeah, that's all done with those lips, those magical lips. Yeah.
Very cool. Kurt, I sort of cut you off a little back there. Was there something you were going to jump in and add?
No, actually, Ryan really covered that well. I'm talking about the difference between B flat and C. The only thing I was going to add to that line of thinking was that it's really a personal preference. So it's not. A lot of trumpet players that are playing in symphonies prefer the C trumpet. They prefer the back pressure of the C trumpet, and they prefer the sound. It just seems to cut a little bit more with strings. But that doesn't mean that they occasionally won't pick up a B flat on something. And a lot of it has to do with what keys are. If they're having it transposed to certain keys, some things lay better finger-wise. You're in the right key. Let's say if all of a sudden I pick up a D trumpet to play something, rather than trying to play it on a different horn and transpose, and all of a sudden I'm in 5, 6 sharps. All this, it really helps in transposition as well. And then some of it's just, if you want a lighter sound, sometimes you'll see a trumpet player pick up a smaller horn, like I said, a D or an E flat, even a G trumpet, and play something very light and tasty up high. They're not having to kind of put so much pressure to get those upper notes. They can back off a little bit. So it's kind of right. It's like finding the right instrument for the right job at the right time. And you'll find different players sitting right next to each other, having a different preference on which horn they may decide is the right trumpet at that particular passage.
And again, that comes right back to all of your professionalism, where you look at the chart, you've got your arsenal of horns, and you go, okay, I know which one I'm going to play on this song, and you know what to do. I have a question for the whole group. I'm a parent, and I come up to you and I say, what instrument should I start my child out on? What's your answer?
Well, as an educator, we often have students come to all of us and say, or parents and say, hey, we've started on piano, and that's a great foundation because, again, you're learning both clefs. You're getting two hands to do things together. That's a very complex thing in terms of motor skills. So that's always a great foundation, I would say, my personal opinion. And then I think a lot of it is, what is the sound in your head that you sort of want to reproduce on a one instrument? Does it want to be, is that maybe more of a high sound or a low sound? And then as a band director, I'm going to steer students towards certain instruments to try to balance my ensemble. So I might say, hey, would you, if the player's been playing a year or two, I might say, hey, would you try the French horn, which we haven't really talked about yet today, or some kinds of things. So I think all of that kind of factors in. And then, just to be candid, you got to figure out make a sound on. There are students that can pick up a woodwind instrument, and with that reed, they can make a sound right away. And there are kids who can't. And so, and family as well. So some of it's just as pragmatic as that.
June, how about you?
Well, I think Ryan really summed it all up. I would too agree that I think starting on piano, I started on piano. I heard Ryan say he started on piano. You can't go wrong starting a child on piano because treble clef and bass clef right off the bat. And that way, no matter which instrument they delve into down the road, they're going to have that background. So I think that's fabulous. And I think too, having a child pick an instrument that entices them to want to practice, they've got to want to do it. They may be able to make a sound right away, but I always tell kids, you got to find your passion, because you're going to have to put like a little bit of effort into it. Like most kids like sports. And so I tell them, look, if you like that sport, you're going to be out there practicing it. So if you like this instrument, you're going to put some time in it, because it may not sound great right away. You go in and you demonstrate for them and they think that's what it's going to sound like tomorrow. It's not, so you just say, look, keep doing that. But they have to have a want for that instrument, for whatever it is. And then if it doesn't work and they go, I'd really rather go play percussion, you got to give them a shot at it, because it keeps their interest in music. And that's the name of the game, because if they love music, they'll find that niche that they like. So
excellent. So don't pigeonhole your kids. If you want them to play this instrument, that isn't necessarily the right instrument for them. Even if they say, I want to start on saxophone, they may change their mind as they go on. I mean, you've all said, this instrument is the one that resonated with me. You said it about trombone. You said it about trumpet. Our director, Carolyn Grant, says it about cello. When she first embraced the cello, she knew that was the instrument for her. So Kurt, how about you? What would your advice be?
We're at the same line of thinking. I played piano for 3 years before I started playing trumpet. My mom was a piano player. My dad was a percussionist. So I was real lucky growing up in a musical family. And when it came time to 5th grade, where I could pick up any instrument, I'll tell you this. What resonated to me was my dad was a high school band director at the time, and when I watched the marching band, I thought the trumpet players were having the most fun. It was that simple. It resonated with me that those guys are cool, and I think I'm going to go do that. And they said, great. So, I think what June said is right. Why it resonated? I've been playing trumpet for 45 years now. I loved it from the get-go and have never lost that passion for it. And I think it's because I picked the instrument that really did strike a chord with me, so to speak.
Perfect. I mean, those answers couldn't be any more perfect. And I'd like to circle back, Kurt, to the Disneyland Band. First of all, I think it is so cool that you have been literally handed that baton. That is a 65-year-old institution, and you are conducting that band. In the Museum of Making Music, our first gallery actually gives a really nice nod to John Philip Sousa. And we educate children and adults, of course, about the early marching bands. There's a great mural on the wall of black and white photo of these players in the band, and a nice oil painting of John Philip Sousa conducting. And invariably, when I ask little 3rd grade, 4th grade students, where have you seen a marching band? They'll say Disneyland, right? So from your vantage point, Kurt, as the conductor, how do you find people, children, adults, all ages, reacting to this musical style that came to be over 100 years ago?
Well, that's the beauty of music. You just nailed it right there. Kids, if you watch young kids come up to musicians, what do you see them do? They're bouncing, they're nodding their head, they're bouncing, they're tapping their toe. There's something that definitely strikes or resonates strongly with young kids. So I don't know. I think it's just inherent. I'm not sure where it comes from, to be honest with you, but I know we do a fair amount of educational performances over the years. We did for about 35 years. We partnered with the Philharmonic Society of Orange County and played to close to 30,000 second graders every year. It was the first time that throughout the schools that they would actually have seen live musicians playing brass, woodwinds, and percussion. And every time we finished that program, every kid in that auditorium walked out saying, I'm going to play an instrument. So it was a great program that really hit the nail on the head. It was so effective in the storytelling and also in the way we demonstrated all the instruments. And I think ultimately what young people see is that we're having fun. They look at that and they say, oh, there's some older folks here that are, hey, I love what I hear.